We need to talk about ideas, good ones and bad ones. We need to learn stuff about the world. We need an honest, intelligent, thought-provoking, and entertaining review of what the hell happened on this planet in the last 7 days. We need to sit back and listen to the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Yes, indeed. We need to talk about ideas, good ones and bad ones. We've got lots of ideas on the podcast. This is episode 219 of the Iron Fist Velvet Glove podcast. This is an Australian podcast where we talk about news and politics, sex and religion. There'll be plenty of all of that tonight. And with me, as always, is Paul the 12th Man.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Fist.
And with me, not as always, is our own deep throat, Craig. Welcome aboard, Craig.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, Scott bailed again at the last minute and he's got a migraine. So he's back in bed with hot soup for a migraine. Dr. Craig?
Soup, a cup of coffee does
cup of
wonders,
coffee?
and a dark room and a lie down and close the eyes.
Right. Okay. So,
Yeah.
so anyway, that's. I asked you before for a quick on-air diagnosis of what a migraine, an onset of migraines might be, but you refused to provide any.
Yes, he needs to see his own GP, I think. That would
See
be
a
the way to go.
GP is
That's
the
right.
advice. Good advice.
Very sage
from
advice.
Deep Throat. Yeah. So, look, you've been with the podcast as our own Deep Throat, our secret man on the spot. You've gone to various conferences and bits and pieces for us, Craig. And now that we're live streaming, your identity has been revealed.
Yes, it's probably okay because I think they know me now. I've been going to a few of the ACL sort of dues and I'm starting to get known. So I think it's time to reveal myself.
There you go. So you lasted your secret lasted about 4 years.
Yeah.
Whereas the real Deep Throat, Mark Felt, who worked for the FBI and was the Deep Throat for the guys with the Washington Post, he kept his secret for 30 years.
Wow. Impressive.
Yeah. So at the age of 91, he revealed that he was Deep Throat at the urging of his daughter. Obviously, he was on death's door and she said, "Come on, you better tell everybody." We've spared your children the necessity to do that by revealing you now.
They might be horrified now. I don't know.
Right. Okay, dear listener, we've got lots of really, really good topics. This episode could go 3 hours. Have you got to go anywhere tonight, Craig?
It doesn't seem like I will be, but does it?
I know you don't. You don't. You're good.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
3 hours. If we were to get onto the, it could be a long one, but we'll see.
What about Mrs. Fist? She might object.
Yeah. She stopped listening. I think.
Has she?
I think. Yeah, a couple of long ones was enough, and I don't think she caught up. So I don't know. Anyway, right, dear listener, news and politics, sex and religion. So first up, in Australia, we've got Scott Morrison is talking about introducing a new system for welfare recipients, whereby they'll be drug tested, and he calls this compassionate conservatism. And that sounds like an oxymoron if ever I've heard one.
It does, doesn't it?
So,
Yeah, but look, conservatism isn't necessarily a completely bad thing, is it?
no. But
I mean, seriously. I mean, having sort of dabbled in leftist politics, and then when you look at the Conservatives, I don't mean the extreme right wingers. I just mean the normal run of the mill Conservatives. They actually start to look somewhat sort of sensible and.
But compassionate isn't a word. It's more of a look after yourself sort of thing rather than a compassion.
Oh, he's just trying to dress up his policy in, nice sounding words, isn't he?
So let's just look at the proposal for starters. So what we've got is a drug testing trial which would take place in Logan, Canterbury Bankstown and Mandurah, which is in Western Australia. And new welfare recipients would be selected for testing at random. So they would be tested to see if they have been taking illegal drugs, namely ice, which is methamphetamine, ecstasy, known as MDMA, marijuana, cocaine and heroin. So they'll test you at random, and if you're found to have that in your system, then you'll go on to one of these cashless debit cards, which has been used in some remote Indigenous communities. And I think
yeah.
also around Harvey Bay, I think. maybe.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. So those who fail the test will have 80% of their welfare benefits quarantined for 2 years using the cashless debit card. And if a person fails a second test in 25 working days, they will be referred to a medical professional for treatment. My initial thoughts at this point is bad luck if you own an investment property in Logan, Canterbury, Bankstown or Mandurah. I mean,
Because your property value just took
who's
a
going to live
dive.
there? If you're on welfare, you're going to, if you've got a choice of where you're going to live, you're not going to go there, are you?
Yeah, so I mean, if he's trialling it, why not a random selection of locations?
Indeed.
You know, it seems very clearly targeted at areas where there are more working class or poor people.
Yes, who are likely, in his thoughts, to be susceptible to
And
drugs.
are they Labor voting or Liberal voting? What's the member of
One would
Parliament in these
assume
areas?
that they're Labor voting.
Yeah.
One would assume.
So
Yeah.
you've got to be a little bit cynical on that in that regard.
But here's the first kicker of all this is the recipients will be selected for testing at random. So I don't know how it works with you have somebody in charge of your case or whatever, but you wouldn't want to upset them, would you? You know, there you're giving discretion to a public servant who can just say, don't give me a hard time because I will now put you on the random
If indeed
list.
they have the power to do that, which we don't know.
Well, it's saying that they're going to be selected for testing at random.
Well,
So,
you know, at the airport, when you go to the airport, you
Yes.
might be randomly selected to be
Yes.
tested for residues of drug-making chemicals. I've been tested several times.
yes.
I don't know why.
But
I
there's
don't
no
think I look
relationship
like a bomb maker.
between you and the tester. And there's no...
That's true.
Yeah.
And it appears to be truly random.
So
but
we don't know just how they're going to do this randomisation.
Yes, but, you know, I'd certainly be worried if I was a recipient and I rubbed up the person the wrong way by maybe standing up for my rights and saying, hey,
Yes.
you know, what you're doing is wrong to me, then you might be reluctant to do that if it's going to be a random, well, in that case, here's a random test. Off you go. So,
Yeah, and going back to how it was done in Central Australia, was it with
I think in those-
Indigenous population in Harvey Bay? Did they do this drug testing there, this random drug testing?
I don't know how they were selected
So
there.
this is a thing on top of that cashless card
Yeah,
system.
yeah.
So
This is a trial to run it out for all recipients. Of course, all young recipients, it turns out, because what they're talking about is really limiting this to people like under 35.
okay, so
Because old people don't have drug problems.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, in your whole time as a GP, did you ever see anybody over 35 with a drug problem?
Possibly,
Impossible.
yes. No. Yeah.
Like this is
Yeah,
part
that-
of this is
that's
part of the
silly, isn't it?
bullshit.
Yeah.
You know, picking on the younger generation by these goddamn Liberal government again, where you know they'll grandfather everything
Yes.
to excuse the older generation,
Yes.
including welfare drug
Yes.
tests.
And the other thing is, this older generation were young at one stage, and who's to say they gave up whatever habits they had then?
narcotic drugs have been around for yonks, haven't
yeah,
they? I mean,
yeah,
let's face
that's
it. And look, in the United States, I think they used to use sort of drug laws to, in a way, target non-white people, didn't they? Because I mean,
Oh, yeah,
there are
yeah.
stories. I know Louis Armstrong was someone who smoked marijuana every day. Was a report I read.
Right. Yep.
And it would appear they left him alone because he was famous and popular. But people like Billie Holiday was a heroin addict, and she was arrested and thrown in the can.
she was harassed.
Yeah, harassed.
Yeah.
So
It's
you know, it would appear to me. I mean, the cashless card was used in Indigenous communities. I don't think due to any connection with drugs exactly, but because they perceived that people in that community on welfare were spending it on things that
well, it was alcohol.
yeah,
A
alcohol.
drug,
Well, that's-
a legal drug of
Well,
alcohol.
that's
But
the elephant in
gambling
the
too,
room.
probably.
That's the elephant in the room, isn't it? That when you look at drugs across across the society, then alcohol and tobacco are far in excess of any of these other so-called illicit drugs.
Yeah, and responsible for far more harm to people.
Oh yeah, that's
in
right.
terms of
That's right, and
So if you're on a cashless debit card, 20% of your welfare is in your normal account, and 80% goes onto the special card. And on the special card, you can use it to go shopping and pay bills and buy clothes, but you can't get cash out, and you can't spend it on gambling or alcohol. So
the thing that strikes me is the amount of money that welfare recipients are getting. I don't know how there would be enough money left over to buy anything, let alone even a pack of cigarettes. You know?
yeah, that's right. If they can arrange their resources such that they've got money left over to buy alcohol out of that,
budgeting magic, that's what it'd be.
exactly.
Yeah, so,
You'd say good luck to you if you can do that. So.
maybe should send them for an interview with an
Financial
accounting
planner.
firm or something.
Yes. Tell them how it's done. Internal documents suggest the trial will cost $5.6 million. And the ACOS says testing is going to be between $500 and $900 per person per test.
Seriously?
Yes.
That much?
That's what ACOS says.
that's a lot of money. And it strikes me that money would be better spent actually treating people who present and say, look, I've got a problem, help me, rather than people saying, look, I don't need any intervention.
Yes. The government says they're going to provide another $10 million to bolster rehab services.
10 million.
Yes.
Small change, isn't it?
Well, why not add the 5.6 to it and make it 15.6 on
right,
rehab
50%
services?
extra, you know,
But all this might be okay if there was a large number of people with a chronic problem, perhaps, maybe. But has this been done anywhere else in the world? What are the other examples? And the answer is New Zealand. So if we're looking for a comparable trial, I would have thought the New Zealand population is a good one.
Quite similar to the Australian
Yeah.
population.
Yep. In New Zealand, about 40,000 welfare recipients undergo drug tests each year.
Still now?
Yes. The tests are only referred by the New Zealand government's Centrelink, where the employers request mandatory drug tests for job applicants. So if it's the employer says, I want the test, then they do it. So it's not random in that sense. It depends on an employer can insist on it.
So it's not used to punish people, but just to screen them for jobs.
Well, I mean, it still sounds like punishment to me. But if a person fails a test, they can be forced to pay the cost of the test and have their welfare payments cut. So
Pay the
isn't it in New
cost of the
Zealand?
test?
Yes. Well, Australia was going to do that, and they dropped that from the. So yes, part of the proposal originally was that people would pay for the test if they failed it, but they've
They're
dropped
on
that
welfare. They haven't got any money to pay for the test.
Well, what
The
they've
states
said
are
is,
bleeding obvious.
you're such a financial genius, you can actually get drugs on the little that we're paying you. Clearly, you'll be able to pay the cost of the failed test as well.
It seems to me the drugs are going to be cheaper than the drug test.
That's the point. So anyway, but here's the thing about New Zealand. So the policy was introduced in 2013 by the national government. And at the time, they were citing statistics suggesting between 10 and 20% of people on welfare benefits were using drugs. But data from New Zealand's Ministry of Social Development shows that of the 47,115 people who were tested in 2017-2018, so 47,000 people, only 170 recorded a positive result for drugs.
It's minuscule, isn't it, really?
0.3% of those tested.
So is it worth it?
Clearly not.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't a problem. This is not a problem that deserves this response. I mean, there's a
However,
problem
was
of...
the test like out of the blue, or did people say, well, I'll just wait 3 days before I have my test?
Well, I guess these were 47,000 people who the employer had said, if you want to apply for this job, we want a drug test.
Yeah, so it could be skewed in the fact that the applicant can, just wait enough time and they know they're clean.
Yeah, well, but still, an applicant knows they're possibly going to get a random test, so they could also make themselves, like 170 out of 47,000.
It's
That's
not
such
cost benefit, is it?
just give the money to the people and just provide rehabilitation services, for goodness sake. Like, this is nasty.
And if
It
that
is
sort of evidence is already available to the government and they're ignoring it,
Exactly.
what does it tell you about the government's agenda?
Exactly.
Yeah, they do appear to want to be tough. They want to appear to be tough. And who can they pick on who's not going to vote for them? It's going to be the people
Yes.
under 35. So
Who vote Labor. Yeah.
and vote Labor.
Poor people.
Yeah, that's right, in Labor electorates. So you've got to be cynical on this, really. You do.
It's all part of this prosperity gospel. Like, these people honestly believe that if you're poor and not doing well, it's clearly
your
because you're
fault.
a sinner and God has not favoured you, because God favours you if you are, doing the right thing.
Well, that
So
does
these
sound
people are
like what they're
sinners.
preaching, so that's what they're saying. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're just wanting to enforce their morality on people.
That's what it is.
There's some similar statistics from New Zealand on earlier years that basically agree with that. And looks like in America, there are situations where they had drug testing. About a dozen states in the US force welfare recipients to undergo testing when authorities say there is reasonable suspicion the person is using drugs.
The old
subjective.
reasonable suspicion. Eh?
Right. So
Where have we heard that before?
So this is one where they're looking at somebody and seeing dreadlocks and scrappy hair and needle marks or whatever they're seeing, tattoos,
yes.
for heaven's sake, maybe. So they've got a suspicion that a person's on drugs. Right, you're going to be tested. So in Missouri, 38,970, let's say 39,000 welfare recipients were. There were 40,000 welfare recipients. 446 were tested based on you look suspicious, and of those, 48 tested positive.
Oh, wow. So that's
So
more condemning, isn't it?
well, that's 10%, but that is of a cohort where you've said you look really
already
suspicious to me,
pre-selected
and
it,
I
yeah.
think you're on drugs.
Yes.
So that's still a really small amount.
Yeah,
Like, it's
the best they could do is 10%.
It was probably people who didn't look like they'd been to church every week.
Yeah. So, so I think this is
The other thing that strikes me, and if you go back to the example in Vietnam, where there were drug users in Vietnam because the GIs were just scared silly being in this battle zone, and they would go on drugs to escape, basically. And
To
the
suppress
fear
their
was
fear.
that when they went back to America, they would be hard to get off these drugs. And a lot of them just came straight off because they went from that fearful situation into, I'm home, that's fine, and just got on with their life. And what the Morrison government is doing then, if they start introducing these type of authoritarian approaches, they're going to make the stresses of being on welfare and the stresses of not having much money worse. And so what do? Well, you try to escape. So you start hitting drugs. Yeah. So
Or
I
whatever.
think they're going to it's going to be counterproductive.
Might even push people towards suicide,
Yes.
potentially, because
right.
of just higher levels of anxiety and thinking, no, it's just not worth it anymore. Even going to the dole office is too stressful now.
so. What you were talking about Vietnam, that was mentioned in Chasing the Screen,
Oh, was it?
I
Yeah.
think, and because he described a situation of rat experiments where they had rats had access to two types of food. One was laced with drugs to get them high or just numb or whatever, and then just normal food. And they had rats in a really awful situation where they were bored, overcrowded, having a terrible time. And they had rats that were in rat paradise where they had lots of toys, lots of other rats to copulate with, and great, rat heaven. And what they found was that the rats in rat hell were just going for the drugged food all the time. And the rats in rat heaven were going for the normal and avoided the drugged food. They didn't want it. And what they also found was if they took rats out of rat hell and put them in rat heaven, they soon stopped taking the drugged food and reverted back to the normal food.
Interesting.
And that's when he said, wouldn't it be great if we could do a human experiment on this sort of thing? And Vietnam was the example where to deal with the trauma of Vietnam, all these guys were on drugs, but the majority, an enormous number, came back to America and basically went straight off it once they were out of the trauma. And hell, if I was in Vietnam, I would have gone on drugs. Like, you would.
It's a pretty stressful place. It would
You'd
be
have
a pretty,
to
pretty
stay
stressful place to
sane.
be. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
So-
very stressful.
So chasing the screen, for anybody interested in drug legalisation, very good. Hey, in the chat room, hi Tony, Will, Caitlin, Daniel, Matthew and Tony. And Daniel asked, do you think it will create a black market for clean urine? So, look, this is why it costs so much. Like when it says, what do we say, between $500 and $900 per test,
Yes.
I guess these are urine tests, they're not blood tests or
Well, they could be either, but I assume they're going to be urine tests because it tends to be a bit easier
then
to.
you've got to have somebody watching and you've
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, it's the
well,
same
that's
as-
the other thing. Like, how embarrassing for people to have to, like, it's bad enough for athletes to
humiliating,
have to,
isn't it?
yeah. For
Hey,
the
you.
average person to go and
You've been randomly selected.
pee in this
just-
jar,
yeah.
and I've got to watch you while you're doing it.
Really?
I mean, for the athlete, it's
I don't
to
think
their
they-
advantage
I'll watch
because
Well, I
want
have to because there will be a market for clean urine then. So,
Yeah, for athletes,
Yes.
it's a different mindset because they want a level playing field. So they're
Yes.
happy to do it in some way because they don't want anyone else cheating. But for these guys, it's just purely like they're picking on me. That can be the only thing going through their head. They're just picking on me.
Yeah.
the other thing about this is, it prevents people spending money on alcohol and gambling because of this card. But alcohol and gambling are legal activities. So
They are
it's
legal.
like they're
Yeah.
not illegal.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's pure moralising, isn't it?
It's just,
And stigmatising
If-
people
Yes.
because they're poor.
yeah.
Given the number of parliamentarians we've got, if you did sort of random testing on them or you looked at them and somehow managed to get their urine tested, you might be surprised how many are either on illicit drugs, but certainly alcohol and tobacco that they're using at a fairly high rate. So it is hypocritical that they draw the line on these legal drugs and illegal drugs. You both know that I'm in favour of decriminalisation of drugs. And this war on drugs has been going on for many, many years. Has completely failed, and we need to abandon this approach that we've been doing. And,
Totally agree.
So there we go. That's that, and we'll see where that leads. But I think it's just another example of
Just
this-
before we
this
leave it,
crappy
the
government.
other thing I think it's doing is this busyness. In some schools you get kids where the teacher just wants to keep them busy and gets them doing things which aren't very educational, but they're just getting them doing things.
Busy work, we
Yeah, busy
call it.
work. Yeah, well, you know about it. Yeah. So this is a government doing busy work, okay, but don't want to spend too much money. So we do a trial of some sort, but we don't actually want to do anything.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Is
we'll
it
do a
all
bit of dog whistling to our supporters.
Yeah.
Well, is it
that's right.
also not a way of deflecting attention away from their lack of doing anything about the economy?
Got no agenda. Yeah.
No
Yes.
agenda
Had
whatsoever.
no idea they were going to be back in Parliament in charge. So
But they can beat up stories about, bludgers on welfare spending spending the good people's taxes on drugs,
yeah, they got no idea. They have got no idea. I mean, we're heading into a recession, and they're trying to create a surplus. Like all economic theory tells you that when times are bad and stagnant, that's when a government needs to spend money and to run a budget.
Budget deficit if
not
necessary.
a surplus. Like it's just economics 101, and these guys have no idea. So hang on tight, everybody, for what's ahead.
It's ideologically driven, though, isn't it? They believe that they have to be always able to stand up in front of the electorate and say, we are running a surplus.
Yes, and
That's
maybe-
what it's all about.
Yeah.
Whether or not it makes sense.
For their own political reasons, but and because people think, running a government is like running a household. You want to be on top of your bills. You don't want to be, and that's not how it works. It's supposed to be a shock absorber. When the times are good, then you run a surplus. When times are bad, you run a deficit. It's a shock absorber.
It's a pretty simple concept. I don't know how they don't get
and
it.
like it was discovered in the 1930s with the New Deal, so like it's pretty damn obvious.
So during the Howard years, instead of handing out middle-class welfare, they could have been spending it on infrastructure and all kinds of things that would have enhanced the capacity of the economy to absorb the downturns. But instead they just gave it away to people.
Yeah, Daniel had it wrong about the black market for clean urine because, as Grant said in the chat room, it would be a yellow market for clean urine. Good one, Grant.
Have you guys ever seen that movie? It's a science fiction movie about the future where people, all their DNA is mapped.
Gattaca, wasn't it?
Gattaca, that's right, Gattaca. And in it, there's one guy who's got the right DNA profile to have a really good job in a company that sends spaceships into the solar system. Right. And there's this, but he's paralysed. He had an accident and he's paralysed.
Right.
And then he sells his urine and his blood and bits of his hair and all kinds of things that can be tested for DNA to this other guy who's got a faulty genetic profile, but he's physically okay and he wants to be an astronaut.
Right.
It's an interesting movie. Yeah, Gattaca.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I want to know is how much the dear listeners are going to pay me for my urine. Any takers?
Is it clean?
Guaranteed.
Yeah. Guy who was being paid to impregnate another woman, a woman, like the husband was sterile and they were paying this guy to impregnate his wife. And the guy doing the deed, though, he ended up being sued by this couple because he didn't reveal that he'd had a vasectomy. So he wasn't helping out.
Yeah.
So if you're taking bodily fluids
False
from people,
advertising, that
check
one.
check them out first. Yeah.
There was a funny segment in that ABC comedy Squinters. Have you ever watched that?
No.
There was, it was several little, couples in cars chatting, driving along and chatting. And one of them was a husband and wife who, for whatever reason, couldn't conceive. So they'd paid this guy to donate his sperm, for in vitro fertilization. And for some reason in this program, in a couple of scenes, this guy was in the car with them, in the back seat, talking to them. It was hilarious. I recommend it to you sometime. It's really, really funny because the guy was a kind of a bogan, for want of a better word.
Okay.
And, the husband was like looking at this guy and thinking, oh my God, this guy's going to be the father of my children.
Right.
Okay. His sperm are going to impregnate my wife. And, it was creating all these sort of conflicting ideas in all their heads, in all three of their heads, probably, except the guy that was the donor. But
DNA testing is showing that a lot of fertility clinic doctors of 20 years ago who were supposed to be getting donor sperm from random people were just providing their own.
Yes.
A whole lot of them?
It seems like
there were cases.
More than two or three. It seems like a few of them.
Quite a few.
Yeah.
Well, actually, in medical school, I was asked to be a donor, and it sort of came out of left field a bit, and I said no.
There we go. All right, we'll move on. We will be back to penises later, but before then...
Okay. Only on the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Indeed.
It might become the Iron Hammer and the Velvet Glove.
Maybe. We need to talk about the Tamil family, the family who are Tamils who are in Biloela and who are currently on Christmas Island, it seems, awaiting deportation.
They are.
Back. And the question is, well, should that happen or not? And let's give a little background first before we decide. So, the Tamils. So Tamils are an ethnic group who speak the language Tamil as their mother tongue and trace their ancestry to southern India and northeastern Sri Lanka. So bottom of India, top of Sri Lanka. And although most Tamils are Hindus, many in the rural areas practice what's considered to be a Dravidian folk religion, venerating village deities, and there's a few Muslims and Christians amongst them. But it seems to be they're mostly Hindus.
Yes.
So what we're talking about here is not really a religious divide as much as an ethnic divide.
Very much so.
Because, the Tamils are fighting the Sinhalese in Sri Lanka, who are of the same religion, mostly.
No?
They're Buddhist.
They're Buddhist.
They're Buddhist,
There we go. So it is a religious divide.
Yeah.
Partly, yes.
Well, I think it's both.
yeah, it's
Right.
religious
Yeah.
and ethnic.
Yeah.
Right.
The Sinhalese definitely identify
Sure,
as
the Sri Lankans are Buddhist mostly.
the Sri Lankan
Yeah, I think
Sinhalese
there
are
could-
Buddhists, yes,
yeah.
definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, it could be some Muslim there, but
Right.
There are some,
Buddhist.
there's a Muslim minority, and of course we saw that bombing several months ago,
Right.
which was perpetrated by members of the Muslim minority there.
So what we had were Tamils in the south of India, and when the British colonialists came in, they just consolidated all of India and lumped them all together. So, and they did the same in Sri Lanka, where the Tamils were sort of separated to the north, and they lumped them together with the Sinhalese and called it Ceylon at that time. And Ceylon and India were lumped together as well by the British, and they eventually got independence shortly after the war.
And not only those countries, but of course Burma,
Yes.
what we now call Bangladesh, Pakistan, that was all part of the British, Indian possession too.
So when the British were in control of Ceylon, Sri Lanka, who did they put in charge of business for conducting affairs?
I bet you it was the Indians. The Hindus, sorry.
It was the Tamils.
The Tamils, yeah.
So the Tamils were a minority who were given a lot of the good bureaucratic jobs because they had excellent command of English. So
So was it because they were Tamils or because they were educated?
it's
and-
because of
and
their
they-
English. They had, for whatever reason, the Tamils had better English than the non-Tamils in Sri Lanka.
Okay.
So what you had was a minority group in high positions controlling affairs. And of course, once the British left, the non-Tamils, the Sinhalese, were going, well, now we're going to fix that because you minority guys being in charge doesn't make sense. We're the majority. We should be in charge. So this is what the British, this was a
So
common...
you're going to blame the Poms for it?
Yeah, I've had some US bashing in recent times.
Okay,
but let's
get
have a little
stuck into
British
the Poms.
bashing. Does this sound familiar to you at all, this scenario? Because if you think of Iraq,
Yes.
and the Sunnis were the minority in terms of population, and the British put them in charge. And what you see, if you are a colonial power and you need to use locals and you want loyalty, the best way of doing it is to use a minority group who will be very dependent on you and will do everything to keep you there as the colonial power because they know once you depart and they're a minority,
Yeah.
the party's over.
I'll keep
So-
this in mind when I have the opportunity.
I was just going to say, in my next colonial enterprise, I'll have to.
Faced with two ethnic groups, a significant majority and minority, put the minority in power and they will be extremely loyal to you because they know it'll all come crumbling down if you leave. So similar, you know, it's
okay.
the
But
way
look,
they
it
do
may
it.
not be entirely
As
due
well
to that
planned as
reason.
that. But
I mean,
it's happened a few times.
Yes,
so.
but historically, there are tensions between various ethnic groups, regardless of whatever colonial power visits.
And certainly it seems that the Tamils had better command of English, and that would have been a reason why the British would have been inclined to have them anyway. So after the British rule finished, ethnic tension between the Sinhalese and the Sri Lankan Tamils rose. So they had a pretty nasty civil war, and about 100,000 people were killed. But that civil war ended about 10 years ago. As of 2018, Tamils make up 25% of the population of Sri Lanka.
Fair number.
It's a significant number of people, isn't it? So, so is it still dangerous, is the question,
For
for
a
a
Tamil
Tamil to
return.
return. And I think the guy in this family went back to Sri Lanka a few times. That was one of the
understand he has, yeah.
one of the arguments. So not a good look if you're claiming that it's too dangerous for you. So the UN has things called a special rapporteur. And I quoted the rapporteur in relation to Venezuela because he had some things that lined up with my thoughts on Venezuela. And I got poo-pooed by Hugh Harris and everybody else, like, who's this UN rapporteur? Well, he's a UN special rapporteur sent to look at these countries and give an independent advice. So what did this guy say about Tamils in Sri Lanka, and he has said that he's observed a pervasive and insidious form of stigmatisation of the Tamil community. The pervasive lack of accountability for the war crimes that were perpetrated during the war, the climate of impunity that prevails within the security sector, the overwhelming economic weight of the military, its involvement in civil activities, overwhelming Sinhalese nationality within the military contribute to perpetuating the resentment and disenfranchised felt by the Tamil community. Got another person, Dr. Matt Withers, Sri Lankan expert, said that the continuing ethnic discontent is very much alive in the aftermath of the war. There's been little reconciliation. And he said that it's hard to speak specifically to the sorts of conditions this family will encounter. I'm inclined to agree there is a high likelihood of structural discrimination, if not a real threat of violence. I don't know. To me, with 25% of the country are Tamils, and the Civil War ended 10 years ago, and sure, there's going to be structural bias, and you're not going to get an even run as a Tamil in Sri Lanka.
But you're not going to be railroaded into a concentration camp or
At
something.
what point will a refugee ever go back home? Like, it's never, you'll never have a refugee who can say, oh, everything's paradise back home now. Like,
Well, I agree,
yeah,
but
here it comes.
But,
Yep.
okay, what we should be looking at is not what's happening right now. This family, how long they've been here? 10 years, whatever?
Yeah.
I don't know how long they've been here. But what was the situation when they arrived? That's it. And now if they're integrated into society, I don't think it's particularly fair to send them back on the basis of what's happening now if they don't want to go back.
But look, they came individually on boats. They met here. They weren't a couple when they came. They met here. They were told by the immigration that their chances of being granted asylum were very, very low, and that even if they had children here, that wouldn't help their case. But they went ahead, they got married, they had 2 children, despite all the advice that that would not help their case to stay in Australia. But, I mean, I can sort of understand that, you know, people might think that if we have children in Australia, surely they wouldn't dare throw us out then because the kids would be Australian kids in a sense. But, it's, you know, I mean, being born in Australia doesn't confer Australian citizenship automatically anyway, like it does in the US. I think the US is one of the very few countries in the world where being born in the country automatically confers citizenship.
Yes. Here you get the best sort of status of either of your parents. So pick whoever's got the best visa, and you get theirs. But just looking at the definition of a refugee, according to the UN Convention, a refugee is defined as a person who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion, is outside the country of his nationality and is unable or, owing to such fear, is unwilling to avail himself of the protection of that country. So good point you made there, Craig, that at the time they may well have been refugees.
I have no idea.
And
but
yes.
that strikes me as being...
Yes, and if at the time they're refugees, then...
Because how long are you going to keep these people hanging?
Yes.
You know, like, they're here, they've enjoyed the benefits of being in Australia, or they claim they do. And, I mean, gee, it's a bit tough to say, okay, well, it's all over now.
Particularly tough on these ones because they did go to country areas and did
They did
obviously
all the right things from that point of view.
entered the community at large and didn't stay in their
That
you
could
know,
have been
silo.
strategic on their part.
Yeah,
Could have been.
Yeah,
Could have been. But they were taken into the country as refugees at the time. The time
Well,
to do it was back then. If they weren't refugees, then
When you say they were taken in, they came
well,
uninvited on boats.
yeah.
So they landed in
But they-
Australia and then they were assessed.
yeah.
but how long did it take to assess them?
Quite a while.
Well, it's now reached the end of the legal road. Is
That
essentially
is an awful long time.
exactly. It went to the High Court. It went to the High Court. That takes a long time.
Crazy.
I know.
Yeah. I mean, it's not. I think the fault is a bit with the system in Australia. If you can't do it faster than that, then gee.
But it would be difficult to say. It'd be difficult to investigate what somebody's circumstances will be in a foreign country. I don't know how they do it.
And not only
how
that,
do they say, "Oh, yeah, I know that when you go back, you're going to."
but if the system happened more quickly, then people would say, "Well, it's a little bit too hasty, isn't it? Shouldn't we be more cautious? More careful in investigating
Yes.
the case?"
Yes.
So whichever way the government goes, they're going to be criticised if they eventually deport them, aren't they? I mean,
I think they.
I feel sympathy for them on a personal, individual, human level, very much so. But if the government grants them asylum, then why not everybody else who does the same thing?
Exactly, and with 25% of the population of Sri Lanka being Tamils. Really,
That's a lot of people.
You can't go into a Tamil town and restart your life again.
But again, at the time, were they true refugees? That's the bottom. And then once someone's been...
Okay, so at every step along the way, everybody that's assessed them has said, no, you're not.
Okay, fair
And
enough.
every time they've appealed and managed to get it all the way to the High Court, who said, no, you're not. So nobody along the way said... We
They're
think you are,
refugees,
and the
okay.
government's appealed.
So they weren't refugees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Not refugees.
ultimately, I'm leaving this country because it's dangerous. Got to get out. I'm so sad to leave my home, but I have to leave because I'm being persecuted. Well, congratulations. Things are a lot better back home.
Well, they could have gone to Tamil Nadu in India, where presumably they wouldn't be discriminated against, wouldn't it?
I don't know.
I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. Yeah. I mean, why Australia? Why come all the way to Australia? Because it's a wealthy, terrific country.
Yeah.
A lot of people would love to live in Australia.
And why is it a lovely and terrific country?
Because of our political institutions.
Yeah. But because we have borders. Let's face it, developed countries are the way they are in terms of wealth because they put up borders and stop people coming in.
It's not only of course. That's a bit simplistic.
No, because if you allowed everybody in, if you allowed free movement of people in the world without restrictions of borders, then the lifestyle we have here would not
Aren't the
exist.
refugees 70 million now?
Would not exist.
Lots of countries have pretty strict border controls.
I know. I'm not saying there's anything different about that.
Not great places to live.
That's true.
North Korea has pretty strict border controls.
That's true. But you know what? Those places would also probably improve if there were no border controls because everyone would leave. So
I see your point, yeah.
So, if you created a world, if suddenly countries just became, the idea of a country became defunct and there were no borders and people could move as easily as capital moves, then our lifestyle would be
they would vote with their
plummet,
feet, wouldn't
and
they?
obviously the lifestyle of poor people would dramatically increase. It's because we have borders that we're enjoying all this, and
basically,
so we're being selfish by pulling up the rope and saying can't get on board this ship. Thank you very much. We have to acknowledge that.
Are you suggesting that the Greens' idea of open borders is not a good one?
Correct. Yeah. Because,
I agree. I think it's a good idea.
Was in the chat room says that they didn't learn English, apparently. So, anyway. I suspect one of the ladies who is a big supporter of theirs from that community seemed to be Christian. And I just think they're so good at organising, and it seemed to me another case of Christians as, being well organised and agitating and lobbying very well. So...
Should the legal system take that long to make a determination? I mean, that's just...
It's a lot of courts to get through.
It
so,
is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Seems to be something very wrong there.
Yeah. Anyway, Christina Keneally, our favourite Catholic, she's called for a Christian response.
Whatever that is.
Yes.
Which Christian?
Exactly.
Take your pick.
Yeah. And Andrew Bolt had a pretty good article saying, well, if we're going to talk about Christian, then whose idea of Christianity? So Keneally, this is according to Andrew Bolt, claims that it's all in Christ's parable of the Good Samaritan, which she says invited us as Christians to take care of the stranger in our land. And Bolt said, but all that the Samaritan did for some injured traveller was bring him to an inn. He sure didn't let the man live the rest of his life in the Samaritan's home.
Got a point.
Yeah. So he's saying, well, Christina, if you're going to take that view, then are you going to stop the whole Labor Party policy, which is to turn back votes? Of course not. I mean, she's so hypocritical. So, yeah.
And they often are.
Yeah. There we go. So, okay. So that's the Tamil family. It sounds like we are reluctantly in agreement on that one. Maybe.
Need to find is the next article we can disagree.
Well, this is the Virgin Mary and the penis. So,
But before we go on,
Oh, yeah,
I mean,
sorry.
other people in the Labor Party have sort of come out and said, "Oh, let him stay," including, I think, Bill Shorten.
right.
I mean, do you think they're just trying to, very conveniently, after, as leader of the Labor Party, he supported the government's policy of boat turnbacks, right? And now he's saying, well, gee, they're nice people. Why don't we just let them stay? I mean, he's just trying to buy popularity, isn't he, really? And I think one of the commentators that you had in your notes highlighted that sort of duplicity. Is the Labor Party, going to change their whole policy now? No, of course they're not. It's just very convenient because these people are in the news to say sympathetic words about them,
Yeah.
Look,
Look, if we were to allow this family, I mean, we're going to have a big issue, and we're going to talk about this in the next few weeks, I guess, is about the West Papuans in Indonesia.
That's
I
a big
mean,
one.
sound a lot like the Tamils in Sri Lanka in that they're an ethnic minority who would be discriminated against and not given a fair run by a different ethnic majority. Then we should be saying, well, every West Papuan who can get on a boat and get here should be allowed. There wouldn't be a lot of difference, I wouldn't have thought, between a Tamil
It's
and...
quite a different history, of course.
Yeah.
And you're probably familiar with what did they call it? I forget what it was some sort of vote of self-determination. But they handpicked like 1,000
There's a corrupt vote.
1,000 locals, West Papuans,
Yeah.
and basically bribed them, gave them food and stuff and said, we need you to vote on something, guys. And they probably, I wonder if they even fully understood the implications of what they were doing. But 1,000 people.
Yeah.
And then the Indonesian government used that as a mandate to take over control.
That wasn't a fair...
But the Dutch and the Australians and the Americans and all the other Western allies, they're complicit because they basically said, it's only some, jungle-covered, part of the world that we don't really care about and the people we don't really care about. So they just said, they can have it. They can have it,
The basis of it has to always be, are they genuine refugees? I think if they are, then we have to be accommodated in some way. It doesn't mean they stay here forever, but you can't let people who are genuine refugees in fear of their life at one of our closest neighbours be persecuted and die. And that we should take some sort of action.
Did you just say, though, that we don't have to let them live here forever?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, then back to the Tamils when you said
Yeah,
earlier,
yeah, I know.
were they refugees at the time as opposed to now?
Yes.
And you were going, well, if
But
they were at the
nuance
time...
is how much time and that too.
Yes.
I think there is a nuance there.
Yeah.
And the nuance also is, well, it's not even a nuance, is are they refugees? Now, if the Biloela people turned out not to have been refugees at the time, that makes a big difference.
Right. It's we haven't spoken about penises for a while. When we get the chance.
Haven't we? Well, let's get stuck into them.
There's a painting on display at Griffith University Art Gallery in Brisbane, which has copped some serious backlash from church groups and members of the public. The painting, Holy Family, by Juan Davila, depicts the Virgin Mary cradling a giant penis.
It's a massive penis.
It is indeed. For the people on... Actually, there'll be a picture of this in the show notes, and
It was quite a decent sort of depiction of a giant penis too, I thought, didn't you?
look. Well, I'm just putting it on the screen here for the
I did
people
see
in
Trevor sent me that pornography.
it's a
It's a big penis.
it's.
Look,
have to
Mary
be
was
3 or 4
just
foot
holding
long.
it. She wasn't doing anything with it.
No, well, she was hanging onto the scrotum as well. But
Oh, that's true.
Well, it's
yeah.
pretty heavy. You've got to hold on somewhere.
yeah. So I've just finished showing that in the chat room. They've got that. So what we've got is a bit like the Falau case. We've got in one sort of brouhaha. We've got sex, religion, politics, free speech, all rolled into one. 12th man.
Have we?
Yeah, we do. So, so there's been uproar by people saying, well, this is just gratuitous
Smut.
smut
Yes.
that's just being offensive purposefully to the Christian faith.
That's right. Deliberately trying to upset people, including our good premier.
Yes. So, and just trashing a religion because it's an easy target is what it's been saying.
Indeed.
Anastasia Palaszczuk, our premier, in charge of our state, she says that her staff have decided that the piece is, quote, too obscene and won't let her see it.
What? What?
How old is
Premier of our state
Yes.
How old?
has been they're censoring stuff from
That's
her.
right. Her staff, according to this article in the Courier Mail, said it's too obscene and won't let her see it.
That's
that
more
amazing?
outrageous than
That's what
the,
she.
the,
I
the-
know.
the picture.
I know. That's why I had to say
They're
it.
treating her like a child.
Exactly. Well, we can't let the Premier see this. It's too obscene. You don't want to see it. We'll tell you about it. We'll give it a sort of a sanitised description, but it's too much for our for goodness sake. Yeah. So, let me see. What Kylie? I think it was Kylie Lang in the Courier Mail was going on about it. So, look, it's art, and the whole point of this piece. It's in an art gallery in the university with a big sign out the front saying there's some pretty hardcore stuff in this room. So don't let your kids in. And then if you're offended easily or even not so easily, don't come in.
And
Or
this
why
means
not-
you, Palaszczuk.
So, yes,
Or why not let your kids in? For goodness sake, it's a penis.
indeed.
50% of the kids
They've got one anyway.
statistically are likely to have one, you know?
Indeed. So for a start, it's not foisted on the public. Like, it's not on the side of a bus. Like, you've got to go and
And deliberately enter the place and open your eyes and look at it.
indeed. So there's a big difference when something is tucked away and is in an art gallery with a big sign saying, well, you don't have to look at it if you don't want to. Then it's easily avoided for people who want to. So I think
And
that's a
yet
big
they've
thing.
taken it off display, haven't they?
No, I think the university was sticking to its guns.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, good on them.
Yeah.
At least they did that.
Yeah.
much.
So there was that part of it. I'm just thinking of other examples. Like, have you been to Mona in
No, I haven't.
Hobart?
No. Oh, sorry. I was thinking Goma in Brisbane.
Right. So when you go down there, there's about 100 on the wall where they've basically taken moulds of women's
Vulvas.
yes, and then done plaster casts and put them on a wall, and there's all shapes and sizes and types all lined up on a wall. Like, it's pretty confronting.
Is it?
Well, you don't see it every day, so you just go, oh, look at that. Like, it is confronting, but it's not like it's offensive. It's very
I wouldn't
interesting,
have
really.
thought so.
So
In fact, there was a magazine some time ago that had a special edition, and they had all these photos of vulvas in it.
right,
You know,
yeah,
precisely to to shatter people's
yes.
I don't know, perceptions that it's something that isn't looked at.
The very fact that it offends you is why it should be done in the first place. Yeah. So let me see. There was a good point here in the Tony in the chat room says, when looking at it, rather than a large penis, is it a small Mary?
Could
This
be.
is how art challenges us. Good point.
Good point, yeah.
Good point. Yeah.
But there's a couple of things here, isn't it? For the artists to get their work across, they've got to somehow get some sort of recognition through this sort of
Notoriety.
and that, and
Sometimes helps
But the
their
other thing
career.
is, you look at that and you go, what's the others trying to say? And I guess with the Royal Commission and Mary being sort of like the central figure of the Catholic faith, and that it's got to be linked up with that, I would have thought, but I don't know for sure. I mean, it also brings back, look at the Charlie Hebdo type thing.
Yes.
The way they made sales was to be confronting and to being sensationalists.
And it begs the question: why didn't the artist paint
Muhammad.
a painting of Muhammad riding a big white galloping penis up to heaven?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the artist wanted to stay alive.
probably.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. But the other point, I guess, is from my point of view, it's freedom of expression. Freedom. And that should be allowed completely, as the Charlie Hebdo cartoons. But I also think in society we've got this. That's the sort of the objective thing. You've got freedom of speech, freedom to do this. But the subjective thing is that in our society we do need to have a civil society. We need to have a respectful society. So possibly that does cross the boundary in that sort of on that sort of line, that we do need to be civil. We need to, people do have these beliefs. If we're going to be secular and we're going to say freedom of belief, then we do need to be respectful as well, or else we might stimulate violence or.
Do we have to be respectful of all
No,
ideas?
so I shouldn't have said the word respectful. I mean civil.
Right.
Civil is more the thing.
Well, is it uncivil to have an artwork that pokes fun at the stupidity of a crazy religion tucked away with a sign saying "Warning: Don't enter if you don't want to"? Like,
Yeah.
I think that's
pretty civil.
I think there's a civil veneer put on that by
Yes.
saying, "Here it is. You can avoid this insult by just not coming in."
Yes. Yeah. I think that's fair
It
enough.
says, I'm respectful of your sensibilities, and so I'm putting up these signs, and I'm not putting it on the side of a bus.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's you're right. I think it's on the right side of the line. Yeah.
yeah.
You're not spray painting it as a mural on the side of a cathedral.
Yes.
Yeah. And I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
a penis is just a body part at the end of the
penis, isn't
day.
it, after all?
And one of the greatest statues of all time, the Michelangelo's David, of course, features a fairly obvious
Maybe
penis.
not of that size.
No. Well, on that point, so just I've got a link to a picture of it here, and you sent me this one, I think, Paul. Yeah. Look at the statue David, and a 2005 study shows that every anatomical detail of David is consistent with what happens when a man is affected by fear, tension, and aggression, which makes sense since David is about to face Goliath. The penis isn't tiny, it's just hiding. So a bit of shrinkage due to fear of facing Goliath.
Physiology. You heard it here on the Velvet Glove.
And you gave another link, Paul, to one in the Philippines where there was a wooden penis tacked onto the head of Jesus
Yeah,
Christ.
that was back in 2011, I think, wasn't it?
Yes. So that one got taken down. But
It
anyway.
did.
Right, that's that for.
But did you read the quotation from the politician who was complaining about it? I think I sent you that in the link as well, didn't I? But
on the wooden penis in the Philippines?
yeah.
Yeah.
There was a quote that I tacked onto the email about what this politician said about.
Well, he said, Aquino said, I did stress the idea that there are rights, but if those rights hurt the rights of others, there is something wrong, and that is not covered by the law. I reminded them that there is no freedom that is absolute. That wasn't it?
No, that doesn't ring a bell somehow. But
Anyway.
that's all right.
In Queensland, dear listener, we have a Deputy Premier, Jackie Trad, who owns an investment property at South Brisbane, which just happened to be near the station for a proposed new sort of underground railway line that will happen. So the allegation is that she shouldn't have been involved in decision making for this because ultimately the location of the station possibly improve the value of her rental property. And the Courier Mail has been going on and on and on and on about it. And okay, she should have declared her interest and all that. But I just want to make the point that these politicians were passing laws about negative gearing and grandfathering of provisions on investment properties. And they own dozens of them, some of these guys. And nobody said, oh, you shouldn't be making laws about negative gearing of investment properties,
Yes.
which was clearly improving the value of their investment properties. And nobody said, well, you can't make that decision because of a conflict of interest. Like those decisions arguably were more important, had more effect on the value of the personal property owned by the politicians than the Jackie Trad decision, not a mention of it.
Yeah. And it came out a few years ago when I think it was Joe Hockey's wife. Can I say this on there?
Yeah.
Joe Hockey's wife apparently
Allegedly.
owned the property that he was paying rent on, at our, the taxpayer's expense. He was given an allowance to rent a property in Canberra to live in while he was there.
So he rented off his wife.
He rented it off his wife. It was negatively geared. You know what I mean? So they were really cleaning up on that at the taxpayer's expense.
There is a bit of a difference here that we're talking about a specific property, aren't we? And also with the hockey.
And of course, he
example.
wouldn't be the only one that would be
compared
doing
to something that affects everyone in society, even if people haven't taken advantage of that particular law. So I think that there is a distinction there.
Well,
she's just got one property. That's only that property that's affected. She's made a decision based on what everyone does when they make a property.
But arguably, she put the station, 200 metres closer to it or further away or whatever to her advantage because she's got decision making, and she would be making a decision in such a manner because it would personally improve her financial position. But
I don't think she would
when
have
a politician
had the power to
grandfathers
decide where the station was going.
Well, yeah, when a politician grandfathers existing laws on negative gearing and happens to have 6 investment properties already, I think it's just even a clearer conflict of interest myself.
I don't think so. I think we're talking about a specific situation compared to a general situation. So I think there's a difference there.
Okay. All right. Next up, we previously talked about ethics teachers in New South Wales. So, dear listener, we've got religious instruction teachers who enter schools. So these are volunteers with 5 minutes training by some theological college who wander into schools and teach whatever they like about stuff. And, I'm exaggerating. Okay, they've got to teach doctrine, but nobody's really monitoring what they're doing in there, and they could be complete nutcases and nobody would know. And in New South Wales, there's a group called Primary Ethics who set themselves up in competition, if you like, to religious instruction. Basically, if religious instruction was being provided, then they offered an alternative of ethics, which was a secular ethics program. And the FIRIS people who are complaining about special religious instruction have never really been happy with the primary ethics people, because really it's saying it's okay to have volunteers come into a school when really it shouldn't be. It should be just education experts from the department who come
People
into
with
schools.
a teaching degree.
So by primary ethics entering into these schools, they're really green lighting the process and just saying, well, it's up to everybody. Whoever can muster up the most number of ethics teachers or religious teachers will win at the end of the day. So FIRIS has kind of always been against them, and were particularly angry with them when primary ethics showed up at schools where there were no religious instruction teachers and started offering ethics classes. And here's a link to an article where an ethics teacher has got into trouble in Sydney for telling students that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander stolen generations were taken from their families because of poor parenting. So this came up in an ethics discussion, and the elderly teacher told the students that what they'd been told about the stolen generations was a beat-up, and that the real reason children were taken from their families was bad, lazy parenting, and children arced up and this guy has been suspended from duties, and so it's an example of you just can't control what people are going to say when you've got volunteers coming into schools. But B, your thoughts, 12th man? You want to get into the stolen generation mess, or you'd want to avoid that one?
I wouldn't claim to have an intimate, deep understanding of the stolen generations phenomenon, but
he was on shaky ground. He's on
shaky
clearly
ground. Very
clear
shaky.
ground where you would just steer clear.
Look, that's an outrageous claim. I mean, it may well have happened in a few cases that the local authorities decided kids were being neglected. That may well have happened in particular cases. I don't know. I'm not saying it did, but it could have. But to then make a blanket statement that was the reason is pretty outrageous, I think.
Yeah. So there's the danger of just letting volunteers into a school and running amok.
Yeah, I agree with 12th man. Yeah, that's spot on there.
Right. Religious discrimination bill that we've spoken about in recent times. There's an event at QUT where they're going to talk about it, which is on Wednesday, 18th of September, midday till 2 p.m. I'm registered, was registered.
I'm
And
not sure I'm going to be here.
you're not going to be there? Okay.
Yeah.
You've got to work.
I have a job.
Yeah.
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 I'm still trying to earn a living.
The Rationalists got invited to a meeting with the Attorney General.
Oh, okay.
And according to Meredith Doig, she got to go with a few other
The
members.
federal attorney general or the
Yes,
state attorney
federal,
general?
Christian Porter. So I think there's about 20 odd people, mostly mostly minority religions, I gathered, plus the Rationalists. So she asked, what about a workplace that might have a rule that disproportionately affects non-religious people? For example, if the Lord's Prayer is recited each morning and everyone is expected to participate or at least be present. His answer suggested this might indeed constitute indirect discrimination against a non-religious person unless the workplace could show that the non-religious person's wish not to be involved could be reasonably accommodated somehow. So anyway, I can't think of many workplaces that have the Lord's Prayer other than schools,
Religious
and they're
schools.
exempt from this.
Yeah.
And the Parliament
And Parliament.
is a workplace. Maybe the Parliament is not exempt. So that might open the door. Some legal expert out there, please tell us. Interesting, I contacted the National Secular Lobby and said, did you get invited to the meeting? And they said no. So the Rationalists got involved, but
Yeah.
not the National Secular Lobby.
Yeah.
Freedom for Faith is sort of a legal think tank group.
Yes.
And
In the United States. isn't it?
no, here in Australia. Yeah.
Really?
We went to their meeting in Spring Hill that time. Remember?
Oh, Freedom for Faith.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said Freedom from Faith,
Sorry.
which I think is the name of an organisation
Yeah.
in the United
Yeah,
States.
that's right. Freedom for Faith.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I
legal
remember that.
think tank here. And they've latched onto Jackie Lambie's comments where she seems to be opposed to the religious discrimination bill. And she said, well, the feedback I get is that my electorate doesn't feel the need for it.
No.
So Freedom for Faith on their Facebook page said, everybody pick up the phone and here's the phone number for Jackie Lambie's office
Okay.
in Tasmania and in Canberra. Here's her postal address, here's her email address, and here's her office address, and get your bums down there. And they'll just crank up the pressure
That's
on
what they
her.
do.
Yeah, that's what they'll do. I didn't, when I was talking about the religious discrimination bill, pay enough attention to this whole sort of the part in the bill that says that charities, religious charities, will be able to employ people of their religion. They'll be able to discriminate in employment based on religion. So a charity like presumably the Salvos will be able to have a salvo shop and say, well, unless you're one of us, we're not hiring you to run the counter or to...
Blue Nurses with the Uniting Church.
Yeah. So So hospitals
chemicals.
and retirement homes are not counted, but just charities. So, you know, you run a soup kitchen or something, and you'll be able to say, well, we only want, you know.
I don't think they would get enough volunteers, would they, if they did that?
Well, just the fact that it's in the Act that says we can just discriminate employment-wise based on religion on something like a charity and for functions that are not relevant to your religion. So it's relevant when you want a religious instruction teacher or something in a school. Okay, it's a Catholic school. We want a religious instruction teacher who's Catholic. Okay, that's relevant, but it's like you don't need a math teacher, for example. So it's that sort of thing is how relevant is it to it? And what Freedom for Faith and other groups are saying is this. They're saying that that religious organisations have an ethos. As part of their ethos is gathering together of like-minded people. So, quote here, this isn't a tricky legal argument. It's the very nature of religious belief that people don't have it in isolation. It's not an individual right. It's actually a right to gather with others. It's a right to teach children. It's a right to gather on the basis of belief. So they're saying that their religious doctrine and identity and faith says that they are therefore allowed to gather together to the exclusion of others in whatever circumstance they want. Running a charity, for example. And I say we've got to deal with this ethos thing and say that the right to gather together to worship is fine. The right to exclude others who don't worship when worshipping is fine. The problem is when gathering is not for worship but is for normal community activities such as education, work or leisure, and religious groups want to exclude non-religious from those non-worship activities. That's going to divide society and be very harmful. And of course, religious groups say that worship activities can't be separated from other lifestyle activities. It's, you know, that's what they say. And we just have to call BS on that and
absolutely.
say, no, you're just running an op shop here. This is not a worship activity. You need to employ anybody and everybody. And it's only when you're actually in the process of worshipping that we will consider allowing you to just limit yourself to other worshippers.
Yeah. What about like a Bible shop or something like that, where it's selling crucifixes?
Well, you need some expertise in Catholicism then. If you're selling Catholic relics and books, okay, you know, I can gather that. But when you're just selling old shoes and or soup, then it's not relevant.
What about the maths teacher?
So, well, clearly it's not relevant.
It isn't, but you know why they want a maths teacher who's a professed, self-professed Christian is because someday some kid is going to say to the maths teacher, "Hey, do you believe that bullshit that they've been cramming down our throats, in religion class?" And the maths teacher, who might be an atheist, is going to say, "Just between you and me, kids, it's a load of crap." You know,
He doesn't have to say that. He just has to say, look, ask the religious.
yes,
whatever.
but potentially, the non-believing maths
course.
teacher might.
Of course.
But that teacher
Kids-
should be professional and know how to answer.
But surely you could also say that teacher should be honest with the kids because, we hold up honesty as a prime virtue. Don't we want teachers who are honest to the children when they ask them a
What's
straight
dishonest
question?
about saying ask another professional?
Well, if the kid says, "No, you, maths teacher, I want to know what you think. Do you believe that stuff that we've been taught about God and Jesus and stuff, or Muhammad or whatever?" Shouldn't the maths teacher be allowed to give their true, honest opinion and give the kids a straight answer? I think so. I mean, if we're going to hold up honesty as a virtue, surely we expect our kids' teachers to be, to live that virtue.
Sir, did you have sex last night? Are you going to be honest about that? Or, what sort of sex did you have last night?
And why not be honest about it? It's sex, for goodness sake.
I think there are things where you don't have to step in your professional role.
Well, you might not
You'll
have
know.
to give the details of the sex, but you know what I mean? Why should we be embarrassed to say to kids, yeah, I had sex last night. I mean, if they ask you a direct question, I mean, I dare say sex might be something you didn't.
That's where we're just going to say mind your own business.
Yeah, that's right. But in terms of something philosophical, like, do you believe in Jesus? Why shouldn't the teacher be able to give their true, honest opinion? It's because they're afraid of that. They're afraid of the truth.
In a school situation, do you want to be a purveyor of information like that, or do you want to get kids thinking? And one way to get the kids thinking on that would be that there are people who believe and people who don't believe, and you can phrase it in a way that you don't have to go there.
Craig, I think that's seriously the coward's approach. If you've got a kid, a young inquiring mind, and the kid, you want that kid to respect you as a person of, integrity, and the kid asks you a straight, direct question, Sir, do you believe Jesus was a God, or do you believe Jesus even existed? I mean, what's wrong with giving a straight, direct answer on something like that? But of course, the religious, school authorities, they definitely don't want a teacher who's going to be honest in that way.
But do you think you should give that same answer in a state school? Is it different to be in a state school?
I would have. If I was working in a state school and a kid asked me a direct question, I would definitely give them a straight
I wouldn't
answer.
change my approach either in a state school, a secular school, or in a religious school.
No, I wouldn't either. I would give the same answer.
I'd give the opposite. I'd again put it in a philosophical way.
Yeah, but isn't that running away from the kids, genuine inquiry? Saying, well, I'm not going to give you a straight answer. I'm going to ask
Well,
you
they're
to go
asking me a personal question, and I feel I don't have to give a personal question if my job was a teacher. My job as a teacher would not be to actually reveal anything about my personal life or that I...
And yet teachers are supposed to be role models, aren't they? And if honesty isn't part of being a role model, what is?
But you can honestly
think
say
that's-
it's none of your
I don't think it's
business.
dishonest.
You can honestly say it's none of your business, and that's not what I'm here for.
Yeah, well, I don't even think that's a good approach, saying none of your business.
I'm
I
being
think it's
blunt.
Yeah,
but I'm,
I see what you
effectively
mean, yes.
saying
Yeah,
that's not what we're here for today.
yes.
I'm not running an ethics philosophy class. I'm running a math class, and if you've got a genuine interest in this, raise that with the ethics religion
But
teacher.
doesn't that
That's
set up something in the kid's mind? Oh, why won't the teacher talk about it? Why won't the teacher just give me a straight answer?
Well, how about this one? Sir, do you believe in the death penalty? Because someone's getting executed in the United States tomorrow, sort of thing.
I would give the kid a straight answer.
Well, in the middle of a math class, I wouldn't. I'd say this is not the time or place for that.
It might not be, but at the end of the lesson, the kid comes up to you and says, "Oh, by the way, what's your position on the death penalty?"
Right.
Before I run out the door, and you just say, "Well, I don't think it's a good thing because there have been so many cases where people condemned to death have later been found to be innocent." And after all, I don't think the state should be taking life. I think the state shouldn't give itself that authority.
But hang on, you refused a kid once who thought you were toffee and of a upper class when he was working class, and you refused to set him straight. So that
No,
was
I didn't.
so.
How did I refuse to set him straight?
Well, he thought you were not working class and that you were an enemy
Just-
of his class.
Yes.
And you basically didn't set him straight. You could have, but you chose not to.
Well, it was a situation where I was asking him why he was misbehaving, why he was very deliberately misbehaving.
Yeah.
And what he told me gave me the answers that I shared with you.
Yeah.
But it wasn't necessarily relevant to the situation. The situation was he was breaking school rules,
Yeah.
and I was asking him to try and give me some rationale as to why he was doing what he did. And he told me, what I've shared with you privately. I don't think it was relevant for me at that time to give him my life history, my biography.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
No,
If
but
you're
it's
in
a different
If you're in a
question.
math class and
He-
a guy's asking
No.
philosophy
No,
questions, you
no.
say, well, that's not
No,
relevant.
this kid didn't ask me.
Right.
He didn't ask me anything because he wasn't interested in me at all as a person. No, he was
made an
telling
assumption.
me. He was telling me his assumptions. He didn't ask me any direct questions. So no, I disagree with you. I wasn't being dishonest with him at all.
I didn't say you're dishonest, but I was saying you chose not to reveal something
No,
because
there was no questioning from him. He wasn't curious about me at all,
all right.
as a person. He was telling me his reasons for behaving like a little asshole, basically. And I just put two and two together and figured out what his assumptions about me were. But he didn't ask me any questions, and if he had, I would have told him definitely. If he'd said, what sort of family background are you from, I would have told him for sure.
Anyway, I think teachers are entitled to keep stuff private if they want to.
Sex positions and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Don't want to give away secrets.
Let them find out for themselves.
Yeah. Right. We're just going to skip that, and we have to get to.
I have to make a confession. I'm a week behind in watching and listening to the podcast. I know. And so Trevor rings me up, and I'm.
You're a week behind.
Did you have to tell the listener that?
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry, dear listener. I know I'm slack, so
Yeah.
I had to cook dinner too. I thought I've got to listen to it quick, but I had to cook dinner, so I haven't got around to it.
Yeah.
But on that topic last week, did you cover was it religious freedoms or something?
Yeah.
Did you cover the definitions part in that draft bill?
Oh, kind of.
Yeah, where it says religious belief and act or activity means
Yeah.
A, holding a religious belief, or engaging in lawful religious activity, or not holding a religious belief, and not engaging or refusing to engage in a lawful religious belief. So
Yeah.
it's like, hang on, have they just defined me with no religious belief as having a religious belief?
For the purposes of the act, yes, they did. So they said holding a religious belief was holding a religious belief or not holding a religious belief, essentially.
That is nonsense.
It's nonsense. But what they were trying to do was to say, we want to protect people who also say things that are anti-religious, in a sense, or express a belief about religion because they don't believe in religion. But given that they gave a blanket get-out-of-jail card to religious organisations, then it wasn't helpful because the sorts of people who might have exhibited discrimination against you for saying something of an atheist sort of vein are excused from the act and can't be guilty of discrimination. So, of course, secular groups are not excused. So statements made about religious belief, well, that's discrimination. And you, secular group, you're guilty. But if an atheist made a statement about their lack of religious belief, the sorts of people who are likely to discriminate against them would be religious groups, and they're exempt from the act. So it was just a smokescreen to try and say, look, we're being fair to secular people as well, but it's not fair when you immediately exempt the people who are likely to discriminate.
Well, there must be other people that who really are offended. I know this thing, you're allowed to be offended sort of thing. And that religious belief means not holding a religious belief. I mean, only in legalese could that ever happen. Like to just the Joe
Well, that's
Blow
like where you
street.
say commit an act of something can be an act of omission as well. It was kind of legalese sort of a bit of that sort of thinking behind it.
Surely they can do better than that. And
where you cause somebody's death by pulling the lever for the trolley, or you cause somebody's death by omitting to pull the lever. So a doing of something and a failure to do something, a holding of belief and a failure to hold a belief, kind of along those lines. But I hope I've explained.
You have explained
Right.
it, but it doesn't placate me.
It would have
that
been
I'm
nice
still
if
offended.
they should have created. It's only ink and paper. It wouldn't have been that hard to say a non-religious belief, and just to throw that in at various times of religious belief, non-religious belief, and cover them both. You're right.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I understand that you can put a submission in about the bill
Yes.
by the 2nd of October. So was that
Yes. No, I didn't.
conveyed to the dear listener?
No, I didn't convey that, but I was going to get to that at some point. But good point.
Yep,
So you're writing yours.
I am writing mine.
Good. Okay. Well, you're
That's as
probably,
far as I've got. I am offended.
right. Let's see. How are we going? Only an hour and 27 minutes, roughly.
Just getting warmed
Just
up.
getting warmed up.
Just getting warmed up. I reckon we'll just try and do Brexit.
Okay.
How hard can it be?
That's actually a very hard topic, I think, isn't it?
I'm confused.
Yes.
It's very
Let's give it a go. Let's try and wrap up with Brexit. Brexit, combination of British and exit. A portmanteau. So that's where you combine a blend of words. So like smog is a combination of smoke and fog. Brexit, combination of British and exit from the EU. Right. Quick summary in 30 minutes. Brexit explained. You guys ever heard of Doggerland?
Doggerland.
Old English expert. Ever heard of
Is it like
Doggerland?
Legoland?
Doggerland.
What's your expertise? What era of British?
12th century.
12th century.
English.
Yeah. Okay. This was 6,500 BC.
A little bit before
Sorry.
the 12th century.
Doggerland. Well, the UK, Great Britain, was attached to the mainland only 6,500 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
Blink
not-
of an eye.
That's not that long in the
really
scheme of
not.
things.
Yeah. That's about, no, it's a little bit less actually than the time when Tasmania was separated from the Australian mainland. That's
Right.
about 10,000 years ago, I
Okay.
think.
Yeah. So, I mean, agriculture only was started 10,000 years ago. So it wasn't that long ago that it was actually connected. So we wouldn't be talking about Brexit really if the mainland was connected to Great Britain, because the thought of disconnecting just wouldn't really happen, I don't think. It's, the geography is playing a part here. So do you remember our episode where we discussed the difference between Britain, Great Britain, the British Isles,
Oh,
the
yes.
UK?
Yes, I remember that. You go test me, are you? Go for it.
Well, Britain was called Britain at a time where it included some land on the mainland of
The
France.
French coast, which is called Brittany.
And to distinguish the islands from that mainland component, they had the islands being of Scotland, England, Wales. At that stage was called Great Britain, as opposed sort of as a subset of Britain, which included a little bit of France. So Great Britain meant the islands of Scotland, Wales, and what we know as England. So the British Isles encompasses Great Britain and Ireland, both north and south, and of course the United Kingdom is. Actually, I should put this on the screen for the people on the chat room. And the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, obviously, is those islands, which encompass Wales, England, Scotland, and includes Northern Ireland. So when we're talking about the UK, it's important to know what we're talking about in terms of a Brexit. You could ask lots of people in the UK and they wouldn't know that. A mate of
So
mine.
Great Britain is just
Great
the-
Britain is just
the
the islands
island
that
mass.
we know of as
And Britain
Scotland,
includes
Wales, and
Britain.
England.
yes.
And
You would think it would be the other way around, wouldn't you?
and yes, so Great Britain was a subset of Britain, which included the mainland component. Yeah.
okay.
So the United Kingdom is known as the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Right. So I'll just come back to this. So 1973, Edward Heath, Conservative leader, decided that the UK shall join the European Economic Community. 1973. He just decided, we're in. They then had a referendum 2 years later where everybody said, well, that was a good idea. 67% voted in favour.
Good number.
So there we go. But that's just interesting. You just said we're in, and then had the referendum 2 years later to start as.
But he
75.
would have had to justify his reasoning,
Yeah.
and sell it to people before the referendum.
No doubt. But 67%. Labor was deeply split. So, and in fact, leaving was official Labor Party policy for much of the 80s. So for a long time, Labor Party was against it.
Any idea why?
Sovereignty issues, loss of control of Parliament to
Not
foreigners.
anything to do with protecting working rights and things like that.
Maybe, I don't know exactly. So at that time, memories of war were fresh, so they thought being a part of the Europe community would help reduce tensions, less idea of a conflict. And the UK economy was relatively poor, and people felt that the UK wasn't strong enough to go it alone, so they better join up with the Europeans. So that was 1975. In 1994, there was a Conservative guy called Norman Lamont, who was former Chancellor, and he revived the idea of leaving as a Conservative possibility. So remembering, Labor had been against it through to the 80s. Really, the Conservatives had been pro-Europe.
Because Thatcher was pro-Europe, wasn't she?
So in 94, this Norman Lamont basically revives leaving as a Conservative issue. He was a significant Conservative figure, and he said, we should be out of this. And he was the nub of a leave sort of component within the Conservatives. That's in 94. And it's been dividing the Conservatives ever since. In 97, Tony Blair took office, and Blair was a real pro-European guy. And so Blair, of course, was Labor. So to be anti-Blair meant to be anti-Europe as well. So Blair was so pro-Europe, he wanted a single currency. He wanted to get rid of the pound. So people who were against Blair, namely Conservatives, one of the things to distinguish yourself as being really anti-Blair was to be anti-Europe. And in this article I read, that was a big part of the gathering of the idea of leaving Europe in the Conservative Party was simply because they hated Blair so much, and it was an anti-Blair position to take. That's interesting.
But Blair was what they refer to as New Labour, and he was quite neoliberal, wasn't he, in a lot of ways?
Yeah, he was the third way.
He wasn't your typical Labor leader by any stretch.
Yeah. So, in 2004, in response to a Rome Treaty, because they have various treaties along the way, giving away more and more power, and Blair announced a referendum on EU membership. But the treaty was scuppered by referendums in France and Netherlands, so that treaty never actually got up, so they didn't have to have a referendum. Okay. So that was... But a few years later, there was a similar treaty, and Gordon Brown refused to have a referendum on it. People said, well, hey, if we're going to have a referendum on a treaty before, and now we've got this treaty, and it's nearly as bad, we should be having a referendum on whether we're going to accept this treaty, because we're giving away a lot of sovereignty. Yeah. In 2010, David Cameron came into government, and he was basically saying to the MPs, stop banging on about Brexit. But the younger Conservative MPs wanted it. And in 2013, he announced a review of the EU relationship to be followed by a referendum. Of course, 2016, we had the referendum, and the Leave case cleverly used emotion and identity and tugged at the heartstrings, while the Remain relied on dry facts and figures. And so 51.9% voted in favour of leaving. Cameron resigned, Theresa May has left to implement Brexit. November 2018, a draft withdrawal agreement was published. So the House of Commons voted it down 3 times. So this is the agreement between May that May had struck with the EU. Voted down 3 times. Labor didn't like it because it transferred a lot of power from Parliament to the executive. So ministers could just rack up laws willy-nilly in order to because arguably, the argument was they needed this capacity because we need to make a lot of laws really quickly.
Yeah, and it was going to be
we're
a
gonna
very
leave.
cumbersome process.
And
wasn't
Labor said, well, we don't like the idea of the executive just being able to make laws so quickly without going through Parliament. The Conservatives rejected the agreement because they didn't like the Irish backstop. So, and the Liberal Democrats and the Scottish National Party didn't like it because they just like to reverse Brexit to start with. So the backstop is about a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. It seems incredible, but it is true that, like, you think of the Irish as being just civilised, normal people who just got over it somehow. But it seems apparent to anybody there that if you whack up a border, there'll be trouble immediately.
Absolutely.
It seems incredible, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like you just...
Short memories, yeah.
Long memories.
But is it because
long grievance memories.
Yeah,
Now
for,
that
for those that want to have a hard...
Yeah.
But the
backstop,
fact that there's no hard border means that the Northern Irish Catholics feel like, in practice, they're living in one country.
Yes.
In Ireland as one country rather than a country divided.
Yes. But, we would often think, those, in the Middle East, they're always fighting. Like, can't they just get on and just get over it? And we look at Ireland, we go, well, they sorted it out. Eventually they worked it out. But there's just a simmering tension there that as soon as you put up a border, apparently it'll be on for young and old, which I find incredible, given what people should know. But old grievances die hard, it seems. So
They do.
Europe has said, we do not want a hard border here. So whatever deal we have with you needs to not have a hard border because we don't want to be responsible for deaths in Ireland.
And that's what they refer to as the backstop,
Yes.
a non-hard border.
Correct. And the difficulty with that is, in order not to have a border, you must have free trade. And in order for free trade, the EU is really saying, well, Northern Ireland needs to be complying with the same rules as the Republic of Ireland so that there's no trade rule differences and we can allow free movement. But the UK leavers are saying, well, if Northern Ireland is going to agree to all of the rules of the EU, but without being a member of the EU, and to have different rules from the UK, that's not fair either. So we want to break away from the EU, not be compelled to...
And there are some Conservative politicians in Northern Ireland that have supported Theresa May anyway.
Yeah.
And what was their position? Do you know on the backstop?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
But there's this... It's really impossible to overcome this issue because if you're going to have an open border, then you must have the same trading rules. And in order to have the same trading rules, Northern Ireland will have to adopt the EU rules, whatever they happen to be from time to time. And the people who are wanting to leave are saying, we don't want to be bound by EU rules anymore.
It's hard to see how it can work.
So the unionists, if they leave, if Brexit goes through, would want a hard border, a backstop.
So
unionists are the Protestants.
yes, the ones who are wanting to fight want a hard... Yeah, the ones
the
who
unions.
would want a hard border. So that's the difficulty that cannot be overcome. And Boris Johnson has not come up with some magic formula to say, have I got a solution? We're just going to do this. And they talk about technology making it easier to scan goods and things, but it doesn't exist. So that whole Irish question was never addressed in the run-up to the Brexit election referendum. Like, nobody really explained to people, here's a problem. So got swept under the table. Right. So the backstop seeks to prevent a hard border by keeping Northern Ireland in the single market, even if no trade agreement is reached by the end of the transition period. Yep, said that. So the other thing is that Brexit is really not a big deal to the EU in terms of financial cost. Like, they've done their sums and they figure a couple of % here and there in terms of difficulties for us, but no big deal. Obviously for the UK, huge deal. So there's no equal bargaining position here. It's not like the UK can go to the EU and say, well, we want this and this from you, otherwise, or else. There is no or else. Like, it's just a begging situation. So they're in a really poor bargaining position. Right. Let me just get down to the next bit. So enter Boris Johnson, and the UK is due to leave, according to previous agreements, on the 31st of October. And if there's if the agreement that May sort of negotiated has been rejected 3 times. So at the moment, there's no agreement. Theoretically, 31st of October, the UK's relationship with the EU is just like any other country. Boris, he's just an entitled upper class twat. He's just a bully, and he doesn't care if the UK is screwed over because he'll always have a bottle of wine in his cupboard and a decent meal. Like, he just doesn't care.
Yeah.
So he's happy to take a no-deal Brexit, it seems. Mind you, in the lead-up to the referendum, he equivocated. He didn't know what he was going to do. And the reason was because he didn't care. It was just what's going to be, I'm going to back the winning horse. And he's just trying to decide what was the winning horse because he didn't really care. So he says that he's negotiating right now with the EU, but he clearly isn't because he hasn't said what deal he wants. Like, he hasn't articulated anything about a deal that he's trying to negotiate, and there's no negotiating going on, even though he says he is. So he doesn't want pesky questioning in Parliament. So he prorogued Parliament and said, we're shutting up shop for 4 weeks or whatever, till middle of October. Won't be back until the 14th of October. Parliament's shut down. The EU Council meets on the 17th of October to potentially agree to any new Brexit deal. So presumably he can meet with them between now and then and come to a deal on the 17th of October. Like, time's running out. We're the 10th of September here.
Yes.
So the Parliament was worried that this scoundrel, Boris Johnson, this isn't going to do anything. He's not going to genuinely negotiate. He's just going to fluff around, say he is, do nothing, and hit us with a hard Brexit on the 31st of October and say, oh, sorry, did my best, couldn't do it, hard Brexit, here we are. So
we'll just wing it and do the best we can.
Yep. So the Parliament, this is incredible. I find this part to be incredible. Like, when you're PM, you think you're in charge. You think you're the boss. The Parliament passed a law forcing Boris Johnson to ask the EU for an extension to the 31st of January 2020 if he doesn't get a deal by the 19th of October. So they've said to him, if you can't get a deal that we agree to, then here's a law that says you must ask for an extension till January 2020.
Interesting.
And he initially said, over my dead body, I'm not frigging well doing that. And different people have said to him, well, you could be in jail because the Parliament has ordered you to do it. You're the PM.
They have
It doesn't
legal
matter.
authority,
The Parliament, including enough of your own members gathered together with the opposition to pass a law to
you're
say,
not king.
fucking get down there and ask for an extension if you haven't got the deal. I find that incredible. So he tried to bring an election on because having an election would have meant that Parliament would shut down and it would be impossible to have anything happen before the 31st of October. And he could say, oh, well, it's impossible to do anything during an election period. Not my fault. And so normally when a government says to an opposition, well, let's have an election, in 100% of occasions in the past history of parliaments, the opposition always wants an election and says, yep, we'll have an election because we can win this. We don't want you guys in here. But this opposition,
But in
very
Westminster,
cleverly,
we do it different.
the Corbyn opposition said, no, we don't want one right now because you've got a job to do that we've told you to do. You have to sort out this stuff. And then we'll have an election after.
But doesn't it make you suspicious about Corbyn and the Labor Party?
No, because it's suspicious of Boris Johnson because he he was just engineering that as a means of shutting down debate and shutting down responsibility and weaseling out of this obligation to do what the Parliament had told him. And the Labor said, we're happy to have an election just a month or two later after you've had to jump through the hoops that this Parliament has told you to jump through, which I think is incredible.
Yeah, it is. But, the shutting down of the Parliament for 4 weeks,
Yes.
a friend of mine told me today that during that 4-week period,
Yep.
most of the major parties have their sort of annual conferences anyway.
Yes.
And so therefore most of them wouldn't be in Parliament for more than 4 or 5 days out of that month anyway.
Yeah, that's true. The other thing is, so Boris tried to bring on an election, but the opposition said no because they need Parliament to be sitting in the days after the 19th of October so they can pressure him. So remember how they've got this law and saying you've got to do it, and we need to be around to agree to anything that you might have miraculously struck with the EU. So basically, very clever to say no, we're not shutting down.
But do you suspect they'll say no anyway, regardless of what sort of deal he gets?
I don't know.
Just to, be bloody-minded and bring on an election so that they can
I don't know.
then go out there and campaign, saying, see, he couldn't get a good deal and therefore vote us into office and we'll fix it.
Yeah, could be, but at the moment it's a bit of a poison chalice. Like really, you want to be able to nail him, and so effectively they're saying, yes, we're shut down till mid-October. Meanwhile, you've got to cut a deal. If you don't cut a deal that we like, because we're all coming back on the 19th, and we're coming back because we're not having an election, and you will have to ask for an extension because if you don't, you'll potentially be in jail.
Yeah.
Like that's the sort of advice that they're giving him from different QCs, etc. So,
So on a positive note, wouldn't you say that parliamentary democracy is working?
you could.
And maybe that's something in favour of maintaining national, independence separate from the EU.
Could, but it's really under pressure because the British Parliament doesn't have a written constitution. It's all based on convention and customs and gentlemanly agreements built up over time, which is fine when you've got gentlemen in the place. But when you've got a rogue and a gangster like Boris Johnson, then
Oh, gangster's a bit harsh.
I'll get onto that. I'll get onto that. So at this stage, what this article also said was that Johnson said to the Parliament, let's all vote and have an election, agree to have an election, and couldn't get the numbers because they needed like 60, two-thirds majority or something to call an early election because they got fixed terms. And he was considering a nuclear option of tabling a no-confidence motion in himself and his government and forcing the Tory MPs to vote for it to trigger an election. Like that's part of the sort of games sort of stuff that these guys were considering. And so that's where we're at with that. And actually, I'm going to play a bit of Jonathan Pye because you're talking about democracy. It's really interesting that there's a conflict between direct democracy, which was the referendum, and parliamentary democracy. So,
Which is representative.
headphones on. If you, sorry. Yep.
With my arm.
Yep. We should have.
That's all right. I got it.
Yep. Craig's got a dodgy arm, so we're good there. And we'll play a bit of Jonathan Pye here for you.
Him to suspend Parliament and pretend it isn't about Brexit is just fucking bullshit, right? How long? Okay. Let me just try and get my head around this because it's fucking confusing, Tim. So, we had a referendum, which is what we call direct democracy, but we live in a parliamentary democracy, and we voted to do something that the majority of our elected MPs think is an act of national self-harm. So why the fuck did they all vote to have a referendum in the first place? Dicks. Oh, well, we didn't think you'd vote the way you did. Tough. But anyway, also, since we had that referendum, we've also had another general election where we elected members of Parliament to run the country as they see fit on our behalf, because that's how a parliamentary democracy works. Okay, so, anyway, we voted via direct democracy for something that comes into direct conflict with our parliamentary democracy. But what we voted for, as we were all led to believe, was to take back control of our parliamentary democracy. So, through direct democracy, we're taking back control of our parliamentary democracy, but to do that, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is suspending Parliament. Sounds fucking weird to me. Mind you, so does the phrase Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Okay, anyway, the problem is, after 3 years, our Parliament has no idea how to implement the result of the direct democratic vote because those members of Parliament generally don't agree with the result of the direct democratic vote. So, we're in a position where Leavers are shouting that if Parliament tries to stop a no-deal Brexit, it would be undemocratic, and Remainers are shouting that to not allow them to do just that is undemocratic, which I think is all very positive, okay? Think about it. I think finally we're at a point where the country is ready to come together and agree on at least one thing. No matter how you voted, what you want to happen next, Leave, Remain, Left, Right, Daily Mail or Guardian, we can surely all agree that one way or another, our democracy is fucked.
There we go. That's an
Or-
interesting concept.
Or that it still works.
Yes, but it's interesting, the conflict of a direct democracy and a parliamentary democracy. Yeah.
You know, in Switzerland, they have a lot of referendums. And some people would argue they have one of the more democratic forms of government in the world, anywhere in the world.
California has had a lot of referendums as well. And it's totally screwed California in many respects, where they passed laws that made it impossible to have a proper budget. So
Look, I once discussed this with a Swiss person and said, "Oh, it's really great, isn't it? You have all these, you know, the government actually asks you what you think about all these issues." And the Swiss person said, "Oh, yeah, but we get tired of having to go and vote all the time." And I was like, well, gee, you know, count yourself lucky. Think of all the people who never get asked anything or never have an opportunity to vote about anything, you know.
But this is the problem you get is with the Brexit, isn't it? That a highly technical issue has a simple yes or no, where most people go, as they're walking into the ballot station, go, okay, what will I do? Oh, well, I'll exit. You know, that's all the thought they've given to it.
So anyway, Boris Johnson has got an advisor, let me see, Dominic Cummings, and he's kind of like a Rasputin type character, whispering in the ear of Boris Johnson, like he's incredible bully and seemingly without morals, and just he's out to wreck the Conservative Party. So a bunch of MPs voted against Boris Johnson. Like he's been PM for a few weeks, and there's been like 5 votes on things, and he's lost them all. Like it's just incredible. And normally, if MPs in the British system vote against the government, you know, the slaps on the wrist and there's issues, but they don't get disendorsed from the party. Like it's not the done thing. And so these guys have just said to 18 MPs who crossed the floor, well, you're out of the party, you're disendorsed, you're out of a job. And
These are Conservative MPs.
yes, so they've really gone through them very heavily in a much more aggressive fashion than anybody's ever done in British politics before. So Nick Cohen in The Guardian describes a comparison as being from The Usual Suspects, is a movie with Kevin Spacey, and in it he's playing this character who tells of a gang of Hungarians that wanted their own mob. They realised that to be in power you didn't need guns or money or even numbers, you just needed the will to do what the other guy wouldn't. If they broke even gangsters' lax conventions, not just kill a rival but his wife and kids, then they would dominate. So people who are prepared to break the rules more than other people would come to dominate. And that's his description of Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson in the British Parliament, as being prepared to do things that nobody else would. And really, you could look at Donald Trump as being that sort of character as well, where a lot of its systems in the US has got a constitution, but a lot of things are relying on people behaving properly. And when you've got somebody who just says, no, I'm just not going to be holding to that, people who are prepared to do things that other people won't do end up bullying the others. So that was his description of them. And and he said that basically treat the Boris Johnson administration as a crime gang and think of them that way, and don't trust them, which is what the Parliament has had to do by saying, Boris Johnson, we don't trust you. We're passing a law to force you to ask for an extension. So they're in diabolical trouble. Yeah. And who knows where it'll end up.
It really is.
So there we go. That's Brexit. 20 minutes. That wasn't too bad. There you go.
Look, I read an article, and I've generally had a fairly sympathetic sort of view to Brexit. You know, thinking, well, if the British people want to be independent of the bureaucracy in Brussels, well, good luck to them. But then I read an article the other day where a guy laid out the economic implications, and he said it's going to be dire for the British because, as you pointed out before, if they sever those trade arrangements, they've got none. And then when they want to sell their goods to the Europeans, to the other Europeans, they've got no agreement. So they have to renegotiate everything. And if they think they're going to get the same favourable terms that they have now, they're dreaming. They're just not going to get them.
Yeah.
So why don't they do the Chinese option, with Hong Kong, one country, two systems
Right.
with Northern Ireland that's set up as a little island that's going to do the trading with the rest of the world.
Yeah, but they'll still be...
Do you know what I think? When I was thinking about it, I was thinking if there was a no deal, the UK would say, well, we're not setting up a hard border. Like, we don't mind trade between the two islands. And really putting it on to the EU to put up a hard border. And the EU would say, well,
But they wouldn't.
we're not going to put up a hard
Well,
border
it's not
either.
their territory anyway.
Well, they're not going to say to Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, put up a hard border. No. So I think it would just be a case of there'll just be free trade because neither side, the UK won't want to and the EU won't be game enough to, and there'll be this unwritten law that says free trade between the two islands because nobody's brave enough to put up
But it's not
a
just
sentry
about,
post.
Not just about trade, of course. There's immigration, isn't
Yeah,
it, a factor?
exactly. It'll be a free movement, which will be unauthorised, but nobody will be brave enough to put up a barrier, I think.
Yeah.
There we go. Right. Let's thank the patrons. I'm looking at number 3 on the patron list here. Craig, way back in the 22nd of March 2017, you were with us as a patron.
Yeah, but
You've made $110 $1 donations since
there
then.
we go.
I feel really bad charging you $1 for this episode. Top 3, that's good.
Yeah. Sean, was it Sean and Janelle?
Sean, Janelle,
Pipped me at
and
the
Craig.
first,
Yeah.
Good on you, Craig.
Yeah, good on you. So, look, in years to come, it'll be even more valuable. People go, wow, you were with the Iron Fist Velvet Glove way back then.
Way
How
back.
prescient of you.
Very first episode listening to it, yeah.
So, thank you, of course, to Sean, Janelle, Craig, John, Landon, Wayno, Ayame, Alison, Steve, Tony, Caitlin, Watley, Jimmy Spud, Kane, Bronwyn, Matt J, Robert, Rod, Palais, Maddockman, Dominic, Liam, Dave, Karen, Daniel, Harry, Gavin, Peter, Captain Doomsday, Aidan, Wheatwatcher, Andy, Murray, Melinda, Adam, Greg, Professor, Dr. Dentist, Will, Glenn, Craig, S, Matthew, Clinton, Alexander, Paul, Tom, new patron Tero, thank you Tero. Also the non-patrons who do it through PayPal, Dean, Ken was the beneficiary, Mr. Anderson, Corinne, Mattman, David and Beverly. Thanks to the beer sponsors Was Wayno, Landon, Bronwyn, Dave, Adam, Landon, Caitlin, Zach, Captain Doomsday and the Iron Fist who provided tonight's.
Thank you, Iron
Scott's.
Fist.
Thanks, Fizz.
Cheers.
Cheers.
We do have a lot of expenses. Website hosting, I had to spend a bit of money on the website because we've got a lot of data on there and it was really slow, so I had to spend money getting it sped up. And hosting of the MP3 files, this streaming stuff, subscriptions to The Guardian, Crikey, other magazines or newspapers that we subscribe to. I can assure you this is not a profit-making enterprise. it's
Not yet, Fist.
yeah.
Not
So
yet.
the deal is, and I haven't done the hard sort of squeeze for a while, but here it is. If you've listened to 20 to 25 episodes and you've really enjoyed it and you're at the point where you can't wait for an episode to come down. You're checking your app on a Wednesday morning and you're so excited and you play it straight away and you run through the whole thing. At that point, we expect you to stump up for at least $1 a show. Go to the website, ironfistvelvetglove.com.au. You'll see a link to become a patron. And you know what? You'll just get a really good feeling. In fact, let me see here. Let's just pay a reason why you should. Here we go.
Dear listener, not too long ago, you looked at your podcast app and saw that a new episode of the Iron Fist and Velvet Glove podcast was available to download. Did you silently think to yourself, great, a new podcast. I like listening to those guys. If so, then you qualify as a potential donor to the podcast. Your donation will help cover some expenses, but more importantly, your donation tells the boys that they are on the right track and to keep up the good work. $1 a show is all they ask. Go to their website at ironfistvelvetglove.com.au and click on the donations link.
So there you go. No ads in this show. It's all just a bunch of guys who have normal jobs who get together and do this. So there we go. Independent media voice. We need more of it.
We need more of it, that's right.
So that was a good episode.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. Look, just in my defence, I was away a considerable amount of last week, and that's why I'm behind a week, okay?
Look, as number 3 patron, we've got a lot of...
You don't have to justify yourself, Craig.
That's right. Thank you, Craig. You were magnificent.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Paul, as always.
Always a pleasure.
Scott, get well soon.
Yeah, come on back, Scott.
Yeah, and we will speak with you all next week. Bye for now.
Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
dear listeners.